This is the Magdalene Mantra, and I'm Dyana Jean. My guest today is Dr. Yvonne Kaye, a brilliant, amazing woman who knows that laughter is always the best medicine. So stay tuned for a very fun and engaging conversation. Namaste, peeps. This is the Magdalene Mantra. I'm Dyana Jean, and with me today is an amazing woman by the name of Dr. Yvonne Kaye. Yvonne, hi, how are you?
I am extraordinarily well, thank you very much.
Oh, that's quite fantastic to hear.
Mm-hmm.
I want to introduce you to my guests and list all of these fascinating hats that you wear in your life. And starting off with, first of all, you have a PhD. You're known as a women's advocate, and you actually love being known as a women's advocate. You're a gifted counselor in grief and trauma processes. You're an addictionist, where you provide addictions training to those providing the counseling.
Right.
You're also known as a keynote speaker, a motivational speaker. You're a former radio host, and you're an interfaith minister. Now, where do you find all the time for all of this?
Well, I've had a very colorful life, very full, and people often ask me that, and I say, quite honestly, most of the time, I just don't think about it, because if I really thought about it, I probably wouldn't get up. Because there's, much more time now than I had years ago when I used to be an absolute work addict myself. 24/7, 7 days a week, and carrying a phone and all that, a beeper and all that nonsense. So I help the people who do that now to stop doing that.
Mm-hmm. Don't you feel as if that impairs someone's spirit in a way to be so bogged down?
Well, of course, and usually, at the moment, I'm working with a Rubenfeld synergist therapist because he believes that most of us in this field end up with compassion overload or fatigue. And in my case, without doubt, I got into this work so that I would be very effective with other people and not listen to me. Well, now I'm older, me is saying, just sit down and listen. And it's astonishing the stuff that we stuff in ourselves and put everybody ahead of ourselves, and that's not healthy.
No. You make me remember, my work as a social worker in Philadelphia. I was a supervisor of social workers for a foster care agency working with at-risk children and families and who have been adjudicated and go through the family court system down at 1801 Vine Street here in Philadelphia. And you remind me a little bit of myself because I did do that. Looking back on it, that would describe me, the compassion overload.
Oh, absolutely. And those of us who work with trauma are worse than ever. Worse than anybody. We really are, because it's almost as if we just don't know how to say no. We really don't. And strangely enough, my oldest granddaughter, when she was very little, she's 27 now, but when she was very little, her mother said she was sitting on the floor with a cell phone and she pretended to telephone me. And she heard her say, "Hello, Nana, it's Courtney, how are you?" "Oh, you're working." She was about 4.
Wow.
So these little messages are wake-up calls.
Yes.
And thank goodness I heard her.
Oh.
But there's so many, and that's basically what I do when I work with people who are in the field, is to say, you can't give what you don't have. So you have to give yourself some time. You must have your personal scream list, when you get really, that you want to tear the wall down, that you have people who you can call and just vent, and they're not going to tell you what to do, but it's so important. It's better out than in. That's the way that I look at it.
Yes.
And you'd be surprised that when I start talking, people who have been like I was for years suddenly start thinking, I do that. oh, I do that.
Yes.
And realize that really it doesn't benefit themselves or their patients or their clients.
No, not at all.
Because they are role models, like it or not. Anyone in our field is a role model, even though we don't want to be. And if we're parents, that's even worse.
Oh, I agree. I totally agree with you. So I'm getting off on the subject now of this field of people who would you call it like professional caretaking?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. No question about that. And most of the time I say to people, think about it. Why did you get in this profession? And most of them, if they're really honest, will say to deal with myself. Because what I was dealing with people, I went through. I mean, I always say to people, when I really didn't need to go to universities. I knew what to do because I lived it. And I came across a little saying the other day, which I really loved, and it said, live what you preach. No, sorry, live your sermon rather than preach it. And I just love that, because that's what we need to do. We need to use our experience, strength, and hope to understand people. But at the same time, we have to emotionally detach so we take care of ourselves.
Oh, yes. I used to tell that to my social workers.
Sure.
Because as a supervisor, then I moved up, so I was a little bit more removed. Mm-hmm. Even though I was still compassion overload, I was still, involved in cases that maybe had closed even.
Right. Well, at this point, I also, from a few times a year, I present in Maryland for the VA. And the kind of awful injuries that are coming back from Afghanistan.
That is something I wanted to talk to you about.
Okay. Go ahead.
The post-traumatic stress disorder work that you are, I consider an expert on.
Yes, because I lived it and I have it.
Yes. Now, I don't know, do you want to talk a little bit about your trauma and how that led to your work? Okay.
Yes, I was a child in the Second World War in the Blitz in London. We were bombed out a couple of times, and I was fostered out. So I've been a foster child 3 times. But I came from a family, unfortunately, where nobody talked and everything was a secret. So I just had a label put on me. I was put on a bus. Nobody said goodbye, where you're going, whatever. I didn't see my mother for 2 years. And so that trauma and that noise and the explosions and the smell of burning flesh and stuff like that, I still have that. I mean, I'm definitely in control of it now, but every so often, if I hear a fire siren go, I jump.
Right.
And I don't eat meat, of course, but I can't go anywhere near anything that's burning. So it happens at all different levels, and people who don't understand it think it's like a broken leg. You're going to get over it.
Right.
It doesn't work like that.
No, because you also talk about the difference between overcoming something and getting over something and how they're different. Do you want to talk about that?
That's one of my favorite phrases.
I loved it. I found it on your website.
From a Nora Roberts. Is it Nora Roberts? Oh, I hope she forgives me. But anyway, it was in a novel. And I just read this book, and this line, it said, overcoming is not the same as getting over. And I thought, I'm always astounded that I get these marvelous phrases from places I least expect them. And what that means is, no, I'm never going to forget those experiences as a child, but they're not with me all the time, and I've overcome to do what I do today. And if I hadn't, and a lot of people that were there with me, my friends, some are dead already, some just couldn't handle it, and others have gone on to be successful people, most of us in the helping field. You'd be amazed when I go back to evacuees reunions, how many of the people who went through that blitz, through that war, not only in London but all over England, how many of them are counselors, social workers, probation officers? I mean, you name it, they do it.
Oh, it's interesting. I remember having teenage clients in the social work field that I was in, and they would say to me at times, well, Miss Dyana, you know, what's it like being a social worker? I think I might want to be a social worker. And they would feel a calling to give back because somehow they reached a breakthrough, which does, as you know, does not happen that often.
But not only that, in addition to that, I should say, they know what it feels like. It's familiar. I mean, all the work I do, and with one or two exceptions, I've experienced. I know it. I'm comfortable with it. You know, I do work that a lot of even grief therapists don't want to do because, thank God, I haven't endured some of these things. But because of what I have gone through, I can identify. And even though I'll never know how they feel, and I'm so grateful for that, I have a very strong idea of what's going on in the areas of pain and anguish.
Well, my heart goes out to you, Yvonne. It really does. I recognize the trauma that you have been through, you know, and I went through a little something with fire myself when my house burned down. I was about 7 years old.
Oh, it's awful.
And we happened to be in the house at the time sleeping.
Oh my!
And it caught on it started from a kerosene space heater.
Really?
The heat had been cut off in our home.
Oh gosh!
And so we had to have some heat. It was late October. The flames caught on to the couch I was sleeping on, which alerted me, you know, the heat on my feet, the literal, you know, vision there, visual. And luckily my mom and my sister were sleeping on the sofa bed next to me. My brother was upstairs, but we wanted to be close to the heater so we could stay warm. Of course. But a blessing was that we were so close to each other that we could wake up my brother just by yelling.
Oh, thank
goodness. We tried our best to put the flames out, and it didn't work. My brother's on the phone is melting in his hand trying to call the fire company. So then we run out of the house. I think we got on our hands and knees, though. I think we did that whole, you know, get below the smoke. And stood outside and watched the house burn down.
That is so incredibly dramatic. Anyone that has gone through that will tell you that's probably one of the worst things they've ever endured. But, you know, I think what's so magnificent about this is that whatever has happened, and obviously it's happened to you because I can hear it in your voice, but whatever happened to me in my life, and so many things have happened, there's been a lesson. I've learned something by it. And the quality of life and the greatest gift in my spirituality is humor. I wouldn't be here today if I didn't have this humor and have the ability to laugh with, not at. That's very, very important. I always tell people that. You laugh with, not at. That's derogatory. And what that does, it brings humility. And I remember one of my favorite phrases is, how important is it? Because the next day is not as important as it was the day before. But the humor, the laughter, I mean, we know scientifically it's been proven it releases the endorphins, and anyone who's been tensed up. In fact, I work with the parents of murdered children and the parents of families of children who've been lost to death by other ways. And it's almost unbelievable, although it isn't, it's true, that when I speak at their chapter meetings or their conferences, they want me to be funny. The very first time I went there, I looked at this jammed up place, and I thought, I've had miscarriages, it's true. I haven't lost to death a living child that's been with me for God knows how many years. And it's traumatic, at whatever stage you lose to death a child. But the fact that they wanted to laugh, they wanted to be able to laugh without feeling guilt, was just, I mean, it was extraordinary. And whenever I'm with them, I learn. In fact, whatever I do, I learn just as much, if not more, than the people I'm speaking with.
Ah, yes.
Profound.
I could say that was true for me as a teacher with my students.
Of course.
And they were young. They were young. They were high school and college. I mean, I had older students too, because I taught like a part-time class to people going to college, at night, and everybody was older than me. in that scenario, they didn't believe I was the professor or the instructor in my first world religions class that I taught. But I learned a lot from my students. I think that's definitely true.
Don't you think that's what education is?
Absolutely.
Like, for example, I'm also a caregiver, personally. But we call it care sharing, because I get as much support, love, and understanding from him as he does from me.
Oh, yes. Well, I do that, too, for my mom.
Yeah. Well, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. And it's something I can't really describe, except for the fact that I know that without humor, we couldn't do it. We just couldn't.
No, I agree with you. I am fascinated by the dichotomy that exists between laughter and pain.
Well, it's an expression. Both those things are expressive. And to encourage people to speak to their pain. I do that a lot. If I have aches and pains, I have arthritis, I had bilateral knee replacement, and when I was in hospital, I talked to my knees, and I said, look, you just can't leave this all to the doctors and nurses. You've got to get up. And I wrote this, so I've got chapters on it. It's absolutely hilarious. But that's what I do. I talk to my pain. I talk, why are you hurting me? What am I doing? Usually the answer is, well, if you dropped a few pounds, you wouldn't be in pain. So I get all these comical responses. But the important thing about humor I wanted to mention was that I can't tell jokes. I forget the punchlines. And my children just groan if I try. But to me, humor is an intensive part of spirituality. It's absolutely an integral part of that. It's beautiful. It can be gentle. It can be raucous. But it comes from the soul. It comes from the heart. It's spontaneous. I don't practice being funny.
Right.
That's why people say to me sometimes, why don't you do stand-up? I can't rehearse. So I could never do. I admire comedians. I think they have to rehearse being funny. How hard is that? I could never do that.
No, I appreciate that a lot. I get accused of kind of goofing off a little bit, but I believe it brings me closer to God because it lifts my spirits.
It's your sanity.
Yes, right?
Absolutely. There are times when you absolutely have to back off. You have to just walk away or do whatever really soothes your spirit and soothes your soul for any given time. For example, in the book The Artist's Way, when you write your 3 pages or you give yourself an hour where you just go for a walk somewhere. And I always tell people, if I really want to be peaceful, I'll drive to a graveyard. No one's going to talk to me. And usually they're beautiful with flowers and trees, and I take a book or I listen to music, and within an hour, I'm great again.
Oh, that is hysterical, because my mom is like, I can't stand the dog we live with, but she loves him. She's like, he doesn't talk to me. He doesn't bother me. He doesn't complain. He just loves me all the time.
Oh, I think that's lovely.
One of our dogs, unfortunately, passed away, and I think he passed away from too many meatballs. It's because she's feeding him. She will not back off. And I'm sure he's having a lovely time up in heaven, But
Death by meatballs, that's a new one for me.
Yes. I guess Italian household.
Oh, of course.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
How long have you lived in the United States?
We came here in 1968.
Oh, okay, so good.
And
wow.
the reason you say I'm a women's advocate, the reason I'm a women's advocate is that I probably, apart from my late mother, was the worst codependent on the planet. I am not the woman. I look at the passport that I had when I came here, and I have no idea who she is. I feel so sad for her. But there was no discussion. That was my first husband, and he decided we were going to come to America, so he came 3 months ahead, and I sold the house and took care of my 4 children, the youngest of whom was 9 months old, and flew out here and had a horrible flight. And just some pretty awful things happened to us. But I decided, when I decided to end my marriage, just because I didn't want to be married, was the beginning of who I am today. A woman to be reckoned with, in the nicest way. But I don't put up with any of that nonsense anymore, and I'm in a position to really help abused women help themselves, which is like watching a rose blossom. It's glorious.
That is beautiful.
People who say, well, why don't they just leave? Well, I was married for 27 years. It took me that long.
Oh, that really bugs me when people say that.
Of course, because they're not in that position. They don't know how much of a challenge it is to realize that you're worth something and that you can manage on your own. And I raised my 4 children virtually on my own with very little money, and I worked and I put myself through school. So I'm kind of a tough person if people tell me they can't do it. Because I believe women especially can do anything they choose to do.
Oh, I agree.
I think they're marvelous. I mean, I have many, many men friends. I have 2 sons. I like men very much, but they haven't had the setbacks.
Sure. Right, of course. They're always operating from a place of power.
That's right. And also 15% more money than we get.
Exactly.
That whole Walmart thing is really...
It's a very important part. No, you're making an extremely important point. I mean, in 2011, how many decades removed from the feminist movement? I mean, you wonder what the heck we've been doing all this time, because it seems we're still not quite where we maybe should be. And I hate to use the word should.
I know. But the thing is that I believe. Well, you know what? His name is Joe Weldon, the therapist that I'm seeing, this Rubenfeld synergist, absolutely marvelous. And he told me a story about a man who did a little 5-minute movie thing. And what he did, this man, he was a scientist, and he isolated a cell. He put the cell in a dish, and then he put something in the dish that was good for the cell. And the cell went toward whatever this thing was. And then he put something in the dish that wasn't good, and it went away from it into the corner. And then Joe said to me, well, what do you think happened when he put the good and the bad in the dish? And I said, well, it went to the good. Quite the opposite. The good and the bad, they went away from both because they've been so inured into not having the right kind of substance in their own system to be able to withstand negativity that they didn't know what to do. So the negativity overran the positive aspect, and that's what I see in women. With John, who's my my life partner, it took him 4 years for me to realize he was real. That's how emotionally battered I was. So I understand. You can say to these people, you're wonderful, you're brilliant, you're this, you're that, and they don't get it.
Right. Now, but at the same time, they might parade around as if they do. I mean, if you look at younger women.
Oh, sure.
Can we talk a little bit? And I don't want to offend any women in their 20s, but I've been there.
Oh, yes.
And when I was probably in my 20s and I heard an older woman speak about, maybe some "it's time to get right with yourself" talk, I might have taken offense to it because I thought I knew everything.
Well, yes.
Right?
Didn't we all? I mean, and I discovered what I actually knew could have been written on the head of a pin.
Right.
But you know what? It takes a slap in the face, metaphorically speaking, for us to really understand that we are not kind to ourselves.
Mm-mm.
And that, I mean, I see it with the some of the young women in my family who I absolutely adore, my grandchildren, and they have to have the right makeup and the up-to-date clothes, and if they go to an affair, they have to go home and change their dress in the middle, and it's like, why are you doing that? I never did that because I come from poor. We didn't have that.
Right.
But it's just astonishing, this keeping up with the Joneses nonsense that young women do, and they don't see their inner beauty. In fact, I worked with a school district years and years ago with young women, and we did a whole thing on accepting compliments. And their response immediately, especially if it was from a male, was, "What do you want?"
That is deep.
Yep. Any compliment, what do you want? That's exactly. And I said, "Would you feel that from me? I'm a woman." They used to say, "Well, to some point, yes," but not as much as they did from males, who were very nice young men. They didn't really want anything, but that was the inner self. That was the soul responding to what has been expected. You know, we are what we're taught and what we hear as children growing up. All these things that big people say that we think are true. Because, you know, like you'll never amount to anything, you're not as good as your cousin, and blah, 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 blah.
And how do we reach younger women? Because what I see is a travesty. And what I see is unfortunately through the media a lot, but I was a social worker, and so I saw a lot of things up close young women were engaging in that I don't believe 30 years ago really was the same.
Well, I think there's far more pressure these days, pressure to succeed, and we're also in the technical age where people don't know how to talk to each other. And in fact, I was with a friend of mine the other day who's a school teacher, and she said with texting and so on, young people today don't know how to spell.
Right.
And so there's all this fraught competition.
And you know, it was bad to begin with from the start.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Because I remember that as a teacher, like reading these papers, these college people who got into college.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, this is like, what, it was back in 1999?
Yes. Well, it's worse, let me tell you.
Woo.
It's much worse today because, you know, I mean, if I text my grandchildren, it's a short form of words, so I understand it. But many of them have terrible problems with that. But I think more than that, it's this pressure. And the other thing that I feel very strongly about, because I was a scholarship girl and whatever, we didn't have anything, but I was very lucky to get to a good high school for girls in London. But there's this whole pressure to succeed, but they're not given the tools at all.
Right. What do you think the tools are or should be?
Well, I would love to see courses taught in school about self-worth and self-esteem, and that.
Wouldn't that be something?
Wouldn't it? And let's start in kindergarten.
Right.
Because they just don't understand. The inside is important as the outside.
Right. The inner is just as important. I was just saying that.
Yep.
And what kills me is that they want to cut back the programs for the Head Start program for inner city children.
Yep.
I'm like, are you crazy?
My oldest daughter, as a nurse, she was a labor and delivery nurse, but unfortunately she has MS, so she can't do that. She works in the surgery now, but she worked in the inner city, and she used to say, "Mom, we just delivered the second child of an 11-year-old.
Wow.
And, I mean, she used to tell me stories that just blew my mind.
I helped deliver a 15-year-old's baby. I was her birth coach.
There you know.
As a social worker. And she named the child's middle name after me. I cut the cord. I was like, is this in my job description? What is this?
You do what you do. That's what social workers are. I have a daughter-in-law that used to be a social worker, but she got smarter earlier than her mother-in-law did.
Do you mind if I switch gears a little bit and talk about your interfaith ministry? What do you find joyful about marrying people, first of all? Because you can marry anybody. Anybody can come to you, right?
I certainly can.
Go ahead.
No, ask me, whatever.
Are there any, combinations of faiths that have ever struck you as I wonder if this is going to work? Or, just being funny, but...
Yeah, it's more the family involvement than the religious part. I went to the new seminary in New York City.
Yes, I read that.
To be ordained, and I just absolutely loved it.
Mm-hmm.
And I went there because I heard such horror stories of the way the bereaved parents and family were treated by some of the clergy.
Ooh.
So I thought, it's no good moaning and groaning. Go be a minister, and then you can train the clergy.
I love your spirit.
So that's what I did. But it's funny because I wrote an article just the other day for a web thing on weddings and things. And these days I find in my ministry that people get the place, the gown, the food, the photographer, the limousine, everything, and then suddenly say, oops, we don't have anyone to do this. Mm. Now, they will pay tens of thousands of dollars for their weddings, but they don't want to pay the minister because he's the minister. Well, that's totally different from my aspect of the ministry. I believe that the ceremony in the wedding or baby naming or memorial service, anything like that, is the most important spiritual part of any union. Mm-hmm. And the only people that I've had wonderful couples who have not been that way, but these days I'm seeing it more. But when I do gay marriages, I come first.
Wow.
I'm the one that they want to find.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I suppose they want to find ministers who are sympathetic to their situation.
Sure. And allies.
Very, very best they can for them. And they're some of the best weddings I've ever been to. They're just so adorable. And I absolutely love doing them. But I love doing all weddings. But they are the ones, the gay couples are the ones that say, let's find someone who's going to do this and do this the way we want it done before we do anything else.
Do you think the spiritual component is a little bit more important to them because they're so... I should include myself into this group here. Mm-hmm. So, but I can only speak from my own perspective, and knowing me, of course, it's extremely important. It's the spiritual part of it.
Of course. Well, look, they're discriminated against all the time, and that is one of the major sins in the world, in my opinion. So, obviously, they want that spirit in their heart and soul to be recognized by their higher power, their spiritual guide, and more than anything, to be respected by it. Mm-hmm. And that's what I found. I just create, every wedding is unique. Every wedding I do is different. I work with them, and we co-create the ceremony. Mm-hmm. And I found that all of them who really, really want to do this are really into it because they've never had that before. It's like sometimes if they go to conventional places, they say, well, this is our service, and this is the book, and this is what we read from. And interfaith ministers don't do that. Mm-hmm. We have the highest respect for those who come to us because we want to make that day not only very special, but the beginning of something very real and magnificent and loving.
Right.
The same with memorial services is exactly the same thing.
Oh. Well.
Beautiful.
Right. I get it. Mm-hmm. I get that. Because the last thing you need is a minister making that day even more unbearable, the pain that you go through when you're losing someone and saying goodbye.
Oh, yeah.
I loved what you said about loss and death, and how loss is so much more involved.
Oh, it is. It's much bigger than death. I mean, let's say, for example, these marvelous young people who are coming back from Afghanistan.
Yes, thank you. Are you reading my mind?
Well, we're obviously twin spirits here, so that's good.
Okay, yeah, right?
That loss, I mean, they have to live and survive with unbelievable losses.
I know they
physically,
do.
mentally, emotionally, spiritually. It's dreadful. So loss is huge, from people losing their hair when they have chemotherapy, people these days losing their homes, their jobs.
And the vets coming back who've lost something here. Not only being over there.
Oh, exactly.
You know, when they come back here, things have changed. Now they're dealing with that loss.
It's absolutely huge. You know what? I think it's much bigger than people think it is, because I believe that these young people who do the most terrifying jobs, in my opinion, and come back, and there's nothing here for them.
Right, I know.
The people who work at the VA hospitals are incredible. But they're under threat all the time of these funds being withdrawn, and they do the very best above and beyond their duty.
Right.
People. And they get very little support from government, who are so busy fighting with each other that if they were young kids, I'd slap them.
Right.
So, I mean, I don't think people in that area, a lot of them don't really care. They're just...
It's really heartbreaking to me.
It's very hard. And their families. What about their families?
Right, exactly.
Oh. So,
exactly.
Yes,
I mean, they send their loved ones off. They come back completely different people. After
how many, God knows how many times they've been there. I have a real take on religion anyway, being an interfaith minister, and I love one of the things Mahatma Gandhi said, and he said, God doesn't have a religion.
That's right.
Say to people, think about that.
It's true.
We've made all these different religions who think they're better than the other religion, who hate each other and cause wars and all that nonsense. And having been raised in a war, I have very strong feelings about war. Anyway. But when I read that, God doesn't have a religion, it made so much sense, because that's true. And if you are a believer, then you can believe in whichever way you like. You can follow whatever religion you like. But don't get into that situation where you say, you believe what I believe, I'm going to kill you.
Do you have any plans for a book?
I'm lazy.
But you did radio for 18 years. You can't write a book.
I've written. I've had 3 books published years ago. But the thing is that I'm a deadline person. Now, if a publisher said, we want a book from you, so-and-so, they get it.
Oh.
They get it.
Gotcha.
But I for some reason don't have that get up and go, but I am being pressured by certain people. So
good. So there's more people like me to pressure you? Maybe you'll crack. I don't know. You seem pretty formidable. You're a lady who's been around, knows her stuff.
I do.
A PhD nonetheless.
Well, what do they say? Piles higher and deeper.
Yeah, right. Well, listen, I didn't nearly get enough time with you to talk about everything I wanted to, so will you please come back on?
I'd be thrilled.
Oh, awesome. Great. No pressure.
I will leave it to you.
Okay.
I think the time is right, and I'll be very happy and honored to do so.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Yvonne Kaye. You're a wonderful light in this world. I'm so happy to share this human experience with you.
Well,
the soulful experience of being human, or however you want to describe it.
Yes. Human becoming is what Osbandino called us. Human becoming.
Well, God bless you and all of the work that you do.
Thank you.
And I can't wait to have you back.
And I look forward to that.
Okay, thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.